Welcome to the Country Music Unknown Legends podcast. This is John Mathis Jr., and I'm going to be your host. So what is the Country Music Unknown Legends podcast, and how did it come about? Well, the podcast idea was born from doing research on my father, Country Johnny Mathis. He had a long career in country music as a recording artist and songwriter with a lot of notable achievements along the way. So when I researched some of his music history as a performer on stages like the Big D Jamboree in Dallas, Texas, and the Louisiana Hayride in Shreveport, I noticed names of other artists I wasn't familiar with, and I became curious and started researching some of those artists as well. Both of those shows, the Hayride and the Jamboree, they were popular launching pads for artists who became big stars. Names like Jim Reeves, George Jones, Webb Pierce, Hank Williams, Johnny Horton, and even Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash, and many others. But there were hundreds of other artists working and touring during those times, and it became a bit of a fascination for me to read about their careers, the places they performed at, the record deals they had, and a few surprising accomplishments that pop culture has forgotten along the way. So for whatever reason, fate did not choose these artists to become a legendary household name. Fame is a fickle friend for sure, and it only sticks around for about 15 minutes, if for that long. But these artists stood on the same stages, they traveled the same roads, sang in the same venues, honky-tonks and dance clubs, recorded for the same major record labels and independent labels, and at one time had a fan base and were heard on the radio. They were there, a part of the fabric of an era of country music, a fabric that unfortunately for them, we only see the surface of many decades later. I remember my dad's commentary in an interview for a documentary about the Louisiana Hayride. He was there throughout the 50s, from the Hank Williams era to the end, with guys like Johnny Horton. And he said in this interview, sure, there were big stars that would come and go, but the Hayride was possible each week because of the dozens of regular performers that were on the show. They weren't necessarily big names, but the fans came for the whole show. Those artists were just as important as all the rest and helped create and make up that 4 or 5 hours of entertainment each week. And you have to consider the era of time in country music that we're talking about. Most of the focus of some of these unknown legends will be during the 1950s. That was a time when a lot of people didn't have television. Radio was their entertainment at home. And it wasn't like radio today. Many of the stations today are owned by large corporations, and they own hundreds or sometimes thousands of stations. So a record label today can release a radio single. When it's added to rotation, it's instantly in rotation on hundreds or thousands of stations. Back in the 50s, radio stations were locally and individually owned. Major labels and indie labels would ship their 45s and 78s in the early 50s, and each station, each programmer, each DJ decided whether or not to play that record. And Billboard magazine not only had a country and western radio singles chart, but they had a jukebox chart for what was popular on the jukebox. They had a regional sales chart so you could see who was selling well in Memphis or Charlotte or Atlanta or Dallas. So some of these unknown legends, they were popular in regional areas and got a lot of airplay on radio or on the jukebox, having their latest record spun right after some of the stars of the day. Plus, there were popular shows featuring live entertainment in various parts of the country. There was the Ozark Jubilee in Springfield, Missouri, that also became one of the first TV programs in 1954. There was the Big D Jamboree, of course, in Dallas. The Louisiana Hayride, which was airing on KWKH radio and also on the CBS radio network and could reach across the country. And the granddaddy of them all was the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, airing on the legendary 650 WSM, and there were many others around the nation with their own version of a Jubilee, a Roundup, or a Saturday Night Hoedown. People would come out for these shows from whatever part of the country they lived in, and it was a big part of their family entertainment during these times, or they could stay home, gather around the radio, and listen. I think it was a great time to be an artist or a musician, and we're going to take a look at some of these artists and musicians who were making a living and pursuing a dream to perform and had some good success. So be sure and subscribe to the Country Music Unknown Legends podcast so you don't miss any of the new episodes as we pay tribute to some of these unknown legends.